Not knowing this one thing could cost you your dream home, set your investing goals back by years, and potentially lose you millions of pesos. Welcome to Financial Freedom Philippines, where our mission is to empower Filipinos to build wealth and a brighter future. We are very excited to announce this very special episode for you guys. Today, we're going to be talking about borrowing power. So this is a big one if you're planning on using a bank to finance your property investment. So stick around to learn all about it. Let's start by answering the obvious question. What is borrowing power?
So I think let's start off with a definition. So borrowing power is often referred to as borrowing capacity, and this is the maximum amount of money a bank or a financial institution is willing to lend you based on your financial situation.
Yeah,
all right.
By financial situation, we are talking about your income, your debts, but it's also, and we'll talk about this later, right, is based on the current interest rate and also how long you're going to borrow the money for. All that can affect what your maximum borrowing capacity is, interestingly enough.
Right. So yeah, now that we're down with the definition, I do have a question for you guys. Why should most investors know their borrowing power?
Because the majority of your properties are going to be financed by a bank. It's very unlikely that you will be financing the entire property yourself, right? Like who has, 14 million pesos just lying around in cash, right? Like the average person doesn't have that much money. So you'll probably only have 10 or 20% of that. Yeah. You'll be using a bank to finance the rest.
You also are probably doing it because of affordability, because instead of paying that whole 14 million, you're spreading it over 20, 30 years. Obviously, you add interest to that as well, but it's a whole lot more affordable to pay a monthly mortgage than it is to try and fork out the whole 14 million.
And even if you had that 14 million, is it necessarily the smartest thing to put it all towards a lump sum payment of paying off a house? You could use that 14 million for other things.
Yeah.
No, that's a good question. And I think that's something just quickly we should cover, because we could make a whole video on, is it a smart thing to do to put a whole 14 million down if you're an investor, or to spread that across potentially 3 or 4 properties, right?
Yeah.
So what do you guys think? What's the main reason why investors should use bank financing?
Because debt can be beneficial.
Personally speaking, I wouldn't want to use my own money. I would much rather have somebody else pay for it. I don't know if that makes sense, but I felt like I'm mitigating my risk through that, because I don't have to spend all of my money, right, if I'm investing in case it doesn't work out. So take, for example, I take out like a loan of 10 million pesos. I don't have to shell out 10 million.
Yeah,
right?
you only have to shell out.
Right? Maybe one or 2 million. Yep.
And you're probably meaning if you were to borrow 10 million, it was probably to buy a 10 million peso property, right?
Yes.
And then depending on what you're buying, is it pre-selling or pre-owned? If it's pre-owned, you're generally paying around 20.
Yep.
So 2 million. Or if you're buying a pre-selling, it's going to be 1 million.
Yep.
So a lot less, yeah. So I agree with you, Kane. I think the other reason, and you're sort of alluding to it, right, is leverage. And that's really the secret sauce when it comes to real estate versus, let's say, investing in stocks, is that really in stocks, a bank won't give you as much money as it's willing to give you if you're buying real estate, just because there's collateral in real estate. So they're willing to give you that 80% to 90% of your investment. So when we're talking about leverage, I'll give our listeners an example. Let's say you have 1 million pesos saved up. You can use that 1 million pesos, of course, to buy a property, and it's probably not going to be that great because it's 1 million pesos. Or you can go to the bank and go, hey, I have 1 million pesos and I want to buy a property. Give me 90%, 80% of it. And now you have, instead of 1 million, you have 10 million to play around with, which is a lot more, right?
Yep.
Now, let's say, just an example, you get a 10% return for each scenario. So 10% on the 1 million and 10% return on the 10 million. So on the 1 million, 10%, you're making 100,000, right? And then on the 10 million, you're making 1 million. On both scenarios, let's say you make 10% return. So on the 1 million, you're making 100,000 every year because let's just say, let's do appreciation growth, right? So that means that the property has grown in value by 10% in both scenarios. So in the first scenario, you borrow 1 million. That means that it's grown by 100,000 in year one. Now, in this other scenario where you've gone to the bank and you've asked for 10 million and it's grown by 10%, you have now grown by 1 million. So you see like how big the difference is? It's like, oh, in one scenario, you made 100,000. Yes, you are debt free in that scenario, which is nice. And it's a lot less risky. But then if you borrow the 10 million and your property grows by 10%, well, then you made 1 million. So there's a 900,000 peso difference, right? And that's the power of leverage. Now imagine this. Imagine that over a 10-year span. The gap between the 1 million, 10 million grows every year, right? Because it's just like you're getting more return because you're able to leverage the bank's money. Now think about this as well. Like add the fact that you could be buying multiple properties like this as well. And if you just equate all that, the power of leverage is just shown because you just get so much more return when you're able to use more money. Like the more money you're able to use, essentially, this is the point. The more money you're able to use, the higher the returns are going to be. Obviously, there's risk involved with that. And that's why we're saying, hey, we're just skimming the top of this topic because it's a very big topic.
I do have a question here before we move on. What do you guys want to say for maybe our audience who's scared to use leverage or who's scared of debt when it comes to investing, especially in real estate?
I think that's a lot of people.
I think
a lot of people, yeah.
Yeah, I think you need to remember that there's no other scenario where you'd get such a large amount of money from the bank in exchange for so little. It's scary, but you need to take advantage of the opportunity. And everyone does it, but some people do it wrong, and people who do it wrong only end up with one property. And that's, wrong is subjective. Like there's nothing wrong with that. You know what I mean? But if you want to be successful in your property investment journey, understanding leverage and learning how you can make your money work for you with the assistance of a financial institution like a bank is definitely the way to go.
You know what? I think the main reason it's scary for people is the lack of knowledge.
Yes.
Things like the power of leverage, how to mitigate risk, how to pick the right property, how to, control your finances, all that, right? Because if you learn all those things, I think it would be a whole lot less scary. And that's also why we created this channel, right? Because it is such a good opportunity for people to leverage the bank's money, but it's obviously risky because, you could buy the wrong property, you could lose your job and not be able to pay the mortgage, like all those things. But like I said, if you learn how to mitigate your risk, learn how to buy properties that are cash flow positive, good growth, things like that, then it's a whole lot less scary. So that's probably my biggest advice would probably be to knowledge up and learn, the power of leverage, the power of debt, and how to pick the right property, control your finances, etc. And you'll be a whole lot less scared.
Yep, for sure. And I think just to piggyback on what you just said, Justin, people should be able to know what a good debt is and what a bad debt is. So I think usually people associate debt with being a bad debt, which just means that money's being taken out of their pockets.
Yeah.
But in this case, specifically what we're talking about here in this episode and in this podcast is that we're trying to use debt to bring more money in our pockets. I don't know if that's making sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right? Yeah. So I just wanted to differentiate that for our viewers and for them not to be scared, because it's very common in the Philippines to be scared of debt. It's very taboo, but millionaires and billionaires do it all the time.
Yeah,
Right.
and lots of people
absolutely.
jump on a roller coaster as well and they're scared, but they do it anyway. So just do it scared, it'll be fine.
Yeah. And which brings us to our next topic of this episode, which is topic number 3. What are the benefits of understanding your borrowing power? So what do you guys think?
There's heaps of benefits to understanding your borrowing power. First one is you get to buy within your budget. There's nothing more reassuring than understanding your financial limits. Knowing your borrowing power helps you set like a realistic budget based on what you can truly afford. So this is it's eliminating the guesswork. It gives you a clear range of pricing that you can focus on. It offers you that reassurance that you're not going to buy a house that is going to put you into bad debt. Understanding your borrowing power is very much the first step to gaining that confidence that we just discussed.
Yeah. I think saving time and energy is a big one as well, because, house hunting and finding the right property to live in or to invest in is already exhausting. And then if you do all that and by the end of it, you find out that you can't afford the house, like how much time and energy have you wasted? So like Georgina said, with a clear understanding of your financial limits, it makes it easier to filter out those options that aren't really suited for your current budget.
And then I'd like to add on to everything you guys just said, because I do this as well. I shop around with properties. It usually comes out of my TikTok FYP page, or I just search it in like Lamoody or something, right? And whenever I try to shop, I don't really, before I was enlightened by Estra, I didn't know my budget. So when I was enlightened, it definitely saved me from this heartbreak. When you fall in love with a home, it may be out of your reach. You're avoiding disappointment when you understand the power of your borrowing power. You'll understand your borrowing power rather. By setting your budget up front, you can avoid unrealistic expectations and stay focused on what's achievable for you.
Yeah.
I think we're all guilty of shopping online. We've all looked at mansions and been like, oh, that looks really nice.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, with the help of your borrowing power, you can really be like, okay, I can't afford, maybe this 20 million property, but I could afford this 15 million property. And that's a whole lot more
And
reassuring.
some people don't know.
Yeah.
Some people don't know that they can afford a 15 million property. Sometimes
Oh yeah,
people-
that's very true actually. Yeah.
Yeah, right?
They don't realize, like in their head, they're like, oh, I can only afford this. But
Yeah.
until you actually learn your borrowing power, that's when you'll know what you can actually afford.
Yeah, that's when you get a really good, clear starting point for your home buying journey.
Brings us
Reason
Yeah,
number
go ahead.
one is like buying within your budget, right? So that's the first reason why you should learn your borrowing power.
Now let's hop on to our next reason, which is that by understanding your borrowing power, you lower your chances of losing your down payment and your home. What do you guys think this means?
This is something that happens quite a lot, especially here in the Philippines, where there is that lack of education about how much you can actually truly afford. It's a really common trap that people fall into here in the Philippines. People like to buy a condo, for example, without fully understanding their borrowing power. They get tempted and sucked in by those down payment options that people have to pay. For example, like the rent to owns, or those really low monthly payments stretched over anywhere from 1 to 5, potentially even 7 years. And they think this is a great indication, since I can afford the down payment, I can afford the whole condominium.
Yeah.
Which is kind of an illusion, to be honest. It's a false sense of confidence. It's not really indicative of the actual cost of the condo. When you're paying off this initial down payment, you're only really paying anywhere from 5 to 20% of that whole condominium's price, right? You're just paying the down payment. So it really makes you think that, oh, this condo is so affordable. It encourages buyers to commit early on without considering, the whole financial picture. The reality is, you're not just paying that 20%, you're paying 100%. There's 80% left that you need to pay after that down payment period ends. And you are 100% going to probably need a loan. Do you know what I mean? To cover the remaining costs.
And I guess the problem then is that they don't know that they can get the loan. So that's the problem. It's like people go in and go, oh, cool, like I can afford And then this is sort of the down payment illusion, where they go in and go, I can afford this property because I can afford the down payment options that the developer has.
Yeah.
And then they get shocked that now when it comes to paying the 80% of it, they can't because they never considered that there's like a higher payment after the down payment.
They think
which is the loan.
They think their monthly repayments are going to stay the same. And the reality is that they don't. Because you also need to pay the interest that the bank's going to give you on top of the loan as well. So this is where all the problems start, is one, just initially thinking, because you can afford the down payment, you can afford the whole condo. And two, people haven't calculated their borrowing power, so they don't even know if they can qualify for a loan that's large enough to cover the remaining balance of the condo. Yeah. And then three, they don't realize that the monthly repayments are going to change once they get that loan. So
then what happens then most likely when they can't afford the 80% is either they're going to lose their down payment and give up the property. And that's unless you get really lucky. So you can get really lucky when you need to pay the 80% or the bulk is that you sell it and you ask the developer, whoever, to emergency sell for you. And then if you're lucky enough, then you might even be able to make some money out of that situation. But then if you need to back out because no one's buying, then you lose a lot of your down payment. But not only that, you'll probably, if you're doing pre-selling, because this is where this scenario works better for pre-selling, you just lost probably 5 to 7 years potentially of your investment career. How heartbreaking is that?
Yeah, and it's gonna be so stressful as well, right? Just to add on to that, stressful, especially financially, when they're not able to manage their monthly payments, which would have late fees, and as you mentioned, it might be, I don't know if you mentioned this, but it might be foreclosed.
Yeah,
that's gonna be so heartbreaking if that happens, right? Georgina, you were trying to say something.
Yeah, even if in the worst case scenario, people who aren't able to establish funding through a bank, might have to turn to developer financing. And that's quite high interest rates, especially compared to a traditional lender like a bank. So they're really, really high interest rates. So even though, potentially they might be able to get a longer loan term, because of those higher interest rates, they end up paying even more over the lifetime of their loan. So
a lot more.
So all of these reasons, it's so important to get your borrowing power. This is going to allow you to comfortably finance your condo or any kind of investment, really. It's going to help you avoid losing your investment. And it's like you said, a little preparation now can save you a whole lot of stress and a whole lot of wasted time and a whole lot of regret later. Because otherwise, if you don't, you run the risk of pretty much just, throwing your money out the window. Because that's
by the way, there is, just for developer financing, there is a way to get out of that. So if somebody's listening and they're on developer financing and they're like, oh my God, I can't believe I just heard this. There is a way to get out of that. So if you can pay enough of the developer financing to the point where a bank will give you money, you can move from that developer financing to the bank and lower your interest rate. And of course, Estra Finance is here to help you do that. We can help you from moving for your developer financing, or at least give you what your borrowing power is and what you need to get the amount owing on the condo or whatever you bought to the point where it matches your borrowing power, that we can get you the loan and move you out of that high interest rate developer financing, just as a side.
So that's it for reason number 2. It lowers your chances of losing your down payment, and of course, lowers your chances of losing your home. All right, now let's move on to our reason number 3. Knowing your borrowing power and understanding it provides clarity and confidence. So you have a clear starting point when you understand your borrowing power, because it It simplifies the process by narrowing your focus to properties that match your financial capability, as we discussed earlier. So you're able to know exactly what properties you're able to afford, what properties you can dream of having, right? Instead of like shopping for like mansions, like, oh my gosh, I want this home. And then you find out with the bank, they're not able to give you that money. So yeah, it gives you this clarity and it gives you the confidence that you're able to get the home of your dreams.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely with the confidence. I think, sorry to interrupt, Georgina, just with when you get that starting point, when you realize that you can actually be a homeowner, I think it gives you so much confidence knowing that, hey, like, I can buy homes for 5 million, 8 million, whatever it is, pesos. And that starting point and that number can give you a lot of confidence to start learning about, property investing or just going out talking to real estate agents, whatever it is, right? It gives you that boost that you need to get going.
Yeah, for sure. Georgina, you were trying to say something?
No, couldn't have said it better myself.
Okay. All right. I guess that's it for reason number 3. Let's now move on to our reason number 4. By understanding your borrowing power, you also understand your 3 main resources, which are your capital, your cash flow, and your borrowing capacity, which relates to the theory of constraints. Now, let's talk about all of these. So let's start with the capital, cash
This one's
flow,
a big
and
topic.
very big topic. So I suggest our audience to get a piece of paper and write this down and take notes.
Well, let's just cover it. Let's try to, because I think this topic deserves a video of its own, just like with the leverage. So we're just gonna try and cover the skim the surface, right?
Yeah.
Let's start with because not all our listeners understand what capital, cash flow, and borrowing capacity is. So let's break down the definition.
Good idea.
Yep. Well, let's start with the first pillar of property investments, which is capital. So capital talks about the money that you have available for your down payment, your closing costs, and your upfront expenses. So think of it like a business,
your savings.
right? Your savings, exactly.
Yeah.
Your capital, the money that you have. How about for cash flow? What do you think?
Cash flow is your ability to cover your monthly expenses, including your loan repayments and also property maintenance. Cash flow can also recur to things like income. It's not just profit from your investments. It's literally just how much money you have incoming every month.
It's both ways, your inflow and also your outflow.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So,
And we
cash
mentioned borrowing capacity at the start, which is how much a lender is willing to loan you based on your financial situation. So those are the three pillars that every property investor should be keeping track of when you are getting into this game. Let's explain why.
Yeah. So the theory of constraints is the idea that all 3 of these pillars, right, you are limited by your weakest resource. So one of those 3 will be weakest for you. And the theory of constraints is the idea that you are only as strong as your weakest link.
Yeah.
Very nice. Yep.
So let's give an example. Essentially, what we're trying to say is your weakest resource will hold you back as an investor, meaning that if you fail to monitor these 3 resources and one of them becomes too weak for your portfolio, you're going to hit a roadblock. I'll give you an example, right? So let's say you have enough capital, right? So you have enough money saved up to buy a property. So 10% or 20% of a property, but you don't have good cash flow. That means that the bank will tell you, no, we can't lend you money, which is your borrowing capacity, because you don't have enough cash flow to cover the expenses. So another example is, let's say you have good cash flow, right? So now the bank is potentially willing to give you the money because you can pay off the monthly amortization. But then the bank will ask you, hey, do you have the 10%, 20% to cover the down payment? And then you go, no. So then the bank will be like, no, we can't give you the money. So this is why we say it's very important to understand all three, which is cash flow, capital, and borrowing capacity, because it's what will make you become stuck if you can't understand where all your three resources as an investor is. Again, this is a very big topic, so we're only skimming the top, but that's the main thing. It's you need to keep track of these three things, because if you don't, you will get stuck. As an investor, you need to be thinking about, okay, based on my financial situation, I have, for example, good cash flow, but not enough capital. That means I won't be able to buy anything. Cool. Then that means that you know that you need to save. But then on the flip side, an investor might be, oh, I have very good capital, so I'm a very good saver, but my cash flow is very low. Well, then you need to then figure out how to improve your cash flow. But then on the other hand, maybe you've maxed out your borrowing capacity, so you don't have enough equity to borrow more. Well, now we need to build up your equity. So this is what you need to be thinking about as a property investor, is ideally all three constraints are at the same level. If you have one that's over, it can really hinder your portfolio. And then you need to start thinking about, okay, well, let's say, for example, your borrowing capacity and your capital is really good. You have bad cash flow. Then as an investor, you need to start thinking about, okay, that means that potentially my next property investment needs to be high cash flow so I can get my resources up in order. And then if my cash flow goes up, that means I can buy another property. Again, another example would be if you don't have a good capital. To be honest with you, the theory of constraints is so interesting for the Philippines because they love to buy cash flow positive properties. Well, the thing is, high cash flow. So the cash flow positive properties, I think, is something that we all recommend. But trying to always buy super high cash flow properties isn't always the best for a lot of investors, because really what makes you more money is actually the equity. Ideally, for most investors, I would say, is that they buy high growth areas that are still cash flow positive, because the growth of the property will be faster than trying to save from the cash flow. Because you can find properties that will go from 3 million to 6 million in 1 to 2 years. But you are not going to find a property that's going to make you that 3 million in cash flow in 2 years. You just won't, most likely. So that's why for a lot of investors, the main resource that they lack in to be able to buy more properties is the capital, right? Because if you're trying to save up to 1 million pesos, 2 million pesos, whatever the 10-20% down payment is, right? I'm going on a long rant, so it's almost over, guys. I hope this is interesting for you. If you're trying to, let's say you buy a property and you're trying to save up through cash flow for your next property, it is going to take you a whole lot more time than if you buy a high growth property that will potentially double or triple in 2 to 3 years. And if it does, that allows you to then release the equity, which is the growth of the property, to buy another one. So instead of waiting potentially 5 to 8 years to buy your next property, you may only be waiting 2 or 3 years, which is a big, if you think about it like that, let's just say 3 years. So every 3 years, you're able to buy property, and let's span it over 10 years. So you have bought 3 properties at 10 years versus the person that's high cash flow. Probably that high cash flow person has only bought 1 and they're about to buy their second. So you're beating the other person by at least 2 properties, right? Does that make sense, guys? Am I rambling?
I think ultimately the theory of constraints is a really big topic, and understanding it and all its nuances is key to being able to afford more than one property a lot faster. Yeah. But ultimately, if you are a first-time home buyer or whatever, if you're early in your investment journey, you can figure out your capital and your cash flow quite easily. But your borrowing power is that unknown variable that you need to get checked. If you don't know it, the rest of this conversation is totally for naught. You know what I mean? Like, so you need to balance all three of these constraints in order to be a prolific investor. But as far as getting your first property goes, you need to understand your borrowing power early.
Yeah, it applies more to the property investors, because if you're just buying one property, then I mean, it's still good to know your borrowing power because you can set a clear starting line. But if you're a property investor and you want to make money and you want to retire through property investing, you're probably going to need like 5 or 6 properties. And if you want to buy 5 or 6 properties by the time that you retire, or, you know, by the time you're like 40 or 50, you need to be understanding your constraints, because those are what get you stuck. Like, one of those constraints being low will get you stuck, and that's what stops a lot of property investors from reaching their goals. It's the main thing. But again, we're gonna create a big video on this because it's so important for property investors to understand.
It's a lot to talk about. So I don't want to add too much on that because we discussed it so much already. That's why I told you guys to take notes, because I did. But then again, just to be clear, you've got to remember 3 things here: your capital, your cash flow, and your borrowing capacity. And you have to make sure that those 3 are balanced. Now let's move on to our next reason, which is reason number 5, on the benefit of why did they get rejected, right? But a lot of the factor that played into that, it's because maybe they weren't able to understand your borrowing capacity properly. They didn't know
they asked too much
properly.
Yeah,
they asked too much, right? So by knowing your limits, you can only apply for loans you're likely to be approved of, which saves your time and your energy. And then at the same time, this also connects to what we discussed earlier, your heartbreak. It doesn't break your heart.
Yeah.
Right? Because whenever you apply for a loan and the bank says, no, we're not going to give you the money, you feel sad because you're not going to get the home that you've been planning for. But with understanding your borrowing power, your chances are improved of getting approved, more specifically on that dream.
And applying for a home loan is hard. You know, it's time consuming. You know, it can take,
It is.
you know, a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, you know, depending on how long it takes for you to get all your documents and everything ready.
Documents. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, you really don't want to keep going through this process just to, you know, maybe find a bank that might approve you for a loan. You know, understanding your borrowing capacity early on can really just be like, okay, I know which bank's going to approve me and I'm going to apply for them straight away. And that really shortens the turnaround time of you getting approved for a home loan.
Yeah, exactly. All right. I think we've covered it already. Okay, now let's move on to our next reason, which is that understanding your borrowing power gives you a chance of increasing your borrowing power.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So understand, let me just repeat that again, because maybe a lot of our audience might not have understood that. Understanding your borrowing power gives you a chance to increase your borrowing power. Okay, like I want our audience to sink that in first. What do you think this means, you guys?
This one's a really fun topic, because just because you get a borrowing power, you get a figure with your borrowing power, doesn't mean that it's set in stone. You can always change it. You can always increase it. If you have a property in mind and you have a cost in mind, you can work towards getting a loan to cover that. So, you know, your borrowing power gives you the chance to learn where you stand early on in your home buying journey. And if it's not where you want to be, you just take a couple steps to improve it, and then the bank is going to likely lend you more money. So for example, you know, your borrowing power is based off of things like your income and the amount of debts that you have. And these things are changing all the time. So when you know what your borrowing power is, you can talk to, you know, for example, us mortgage brokers here at Estra Finance. We can explain to you what is limiting your borrowing capacity, such as a high debt, your low income, unpaid credit card debts, anything really. Once you know what it is that's holding you back, you can take steps to improve it. It's not set in stone.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
All right. So since we've already identified what could be limiting somebody's borrowing power, what would be some ways to increase it then? I'd go first. because I think this is what Georgina was trying to say earlier, but technically just reduce your debts.
Yeah.
That's a big one.
Cards to pay off your loans,
Yeah.
right? Pay off your credit cards, pay off the loans. It's going to free up so much of your income, and it will increase your borrowing capacity. Yeah.
Like it is a really good idea to, if you can, pay off like your credit card debt or your car loan debt before you apply for a home loan, because it can significantly increase your borrowing capacity.
I also just want to mention, we talk about this a lot on the Estra Finance YouTube channel, but we haven't mentioned it here in our podcast yet. But banks take into consideration more than just your finances when they're thinking about lending to you. And so showing that you can pay off your debts, that you can pay them on time, it shows that you're a reliable person. And banks actually care about that. They consider you a low risk, and that's a good thing. If you've got good history of paying off your debts, of paying things back to the bank, they're more likely to want to lend to you again in future. So it's not just the financial side, like it's your character that they're taking into consideration as well.
So the other thing there's debts, that's a big one. But the other big one that's within your control is boosting your income. So getting things like raises, securing additional income streams. And we'll talk about this a bit later, but also you have to remember that the bank will not count all your income streams, and they may count your income streams in different percentages. And that will sound confusing right now, but we'll cover that a bit later. But main point is that if you can boost your income, mainly if you're employed, by getting a raise, or obviously getting another job that pays a higher wage. Again, we're not saying that's easy. Of course, that can be a very difficult thing, but that is one way to boost it. Or if you're a business owner, increasing your revenue.
Yeah.
And there's other simple ways as well, such as getting a longer loan period, so instead of borrowing for 10 years, you might want to borrow for 20, maybe even up to 25.
Yes, that can increase your borrowing power.
And timing that as well with lower interest rates. So maybe sometimes the answer is just waiting. There's lots of different options for you when it comes to increasing your borrowing power. Lots of different ways.
So if you want to know how, just reach out to us and talk to us, and we'll let you know how you're able to increase your borrowing power. All right. Now let's move on to our next topic in this episode, which is that what are the consequences of not knowing your borrowing power? So the opposite of benefit, right? So
let's quick fire.
So I'll start off with this one. You won't have confidence. So you won't have confidence with regards to the property that you're going to buy. Then at the same time, you won't really have a starting point. You won't really know where to begin, how to begin properly, or even if you are able to begin your property.
Yeah.
All right. So there's so much complication of not knowing your borrowing power. It's such a necessity in investing in real estate. How about you guys? What do you think are the consequences?
Well, then you put yourself in a situation where you might lose your down payment and your home. Right?
Yeah.
So you purchase a property thinking that you can pay the down payment, and then when it comes to the 80%, you can't, and then potentially you're not able to sell it. Now you have to give it up, and now you have to give up portion of your down payment, and then you also lose your home.
Much higher chance.
That's a consequence.
Yeah, much higher chance. You're also more likely to get stuck in your property investment journey, like Justin was saying with the theory of constraints. If your borrowing capacity is low, you have less chance of buying your next property.
Yeah. And also in that same sense, you're also wasting your money and years, potentially years, right? You have a higher chance of wasting your money and potentially years of your time, because if you're not understanding your borrowing power and you're just taking out loans just because it's what's given to you first, right, without really thinking about it or researching it properly or understanding your borrowing power, it might be costing you thousands of more, if not millions of pesos, and it might get you stuck with what you just mentioned, Georgina. Yeah. What else?
I think not knowing your borrowing power also just means you have a much lower chance of getting approved for a home loan in general. And
Yeah.
Some of that is because you have less time to improve your borrowing power. So if you don't know what's wrong, you can't fix it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's good. That's a good, we covered a good range of consequences of not knowing your borrowing power.
Yeah, tech are right, amazing. So now that you know, most likely your investments will be through a home loan, the benefits and the consequences of knowing your borrowing power. Let's talk about how we calculate your borrowing power, which is our next topic. How is borrowing power calculated? So it's a little bit technical, but it's not algebraic. Okay, so I don't know. Simple math, right? I think people would enjoy this. So maybe get a piece of paper. It's just very simple, or a notepad. Who wants to explain this? You guys, Georgina or Justin?
Okay, so your borrowing power is calculated by your debt to income ratio. And this ratio is basically just your income divided by the cost of your debts on a monthly basis, plus the cost of your new home loans, a monthly amortization. And it's expressed as a percentage. So
let's give them an example.
Yeah, let's do an example. So let's imagine that you earn 100,000 pesos a month. If you have existing debts that are equal to 20,000 pesos, and your new monthly loan payment is another 20,000 pesos, that means 40% of your income is going to paying off debts. So that's what your debt to income ratio is.
Yeah. In doing your borrowing power yourself is because there's so much nuance. Like some banks do 40%, some banks do 50%, and then you also have to figure out how your income is calculated, because each bank calculates your income differently depending on what type of income it's coming from. So for example, if it's just a regular job, usually they will count that as 100%. So meaning if you're earning 60,000, they will count that as 60,000. But then let's say you're also earning rental income. Some banks will do that at 100% and some banks will do that at 50%. So that's a big difference, because then you're calculating, let's say you're earning 25,000 monthly in rental income. Well, then what, for some banks it's 25,000 and then some banks it's 12,500, which is a huge difference, right?
Difference. Yeah.
In your income. And then so that leads to also a lot of people don't know what income to even include in this equation, right? They don't know, like, oh, should I put in bonuses? Can I include my overtime? Can I include my part-time work? And does freelancing gigs include in my income sources? And some of those, by the way, don't. It's very dependent on the bank.
This is the same for debts as well. You know, a lot of people are unsure what debts they need to include. You know, does it include your credit card balances? Does it include your car loans, your personal loans? What about your rent? If you pay rent, does that be taken into consideration? What if you have like a Gcash loan? What if you have an upcoming obligation that you need to prepare for? There's lots of nuance. There's lots of lack of clarity here. It can be very easy to underestimate or even overestimate your DTI.
Yep. So I know a lot of people are probably asking themselves right now, well, can't I just go to the bank and get them to calculate this for me?
Sure.
What do you guys think?
Yeah, they can, but they shouldn't.
You could. It's just
Not a good idea.
It's not necessarily
not the best idea.
Yeah, it's not the most efficient, right? When you go up to a bank, there's a couple steps to how they'll do your loan estimation, right?
Yeah.
And the reality is, if you walk into a bank and say, hey, what's my borrowing capacity? They're going to look at your income and nothing else. They're not going to do a full detailed review of your finances. They're not going to take into account your debts. They're not going to do anything. They're just going to give you a very rough estimate based on your income and nothing else, which is very, very misleading.
Yeah. They do that, by the way, because they want to save time, because it is time consuming. It's called underwriting, and that underwriting is the thing that they need to do to understand if they can give you money. So that's the full checking of your finances. And because that takes time, they only want to do that for people that are actually about to buy a home. Now, again, that put people that are just shopping in a disadvantaged situation because they're not going through your full financing. So they're only giving you a very rough estimate of your borrowing power.
And one more thing, why it's not a good idea to go to the bank, because they would need to approach multiple banks to get an estimate of what they're able to get from them, because each one of the banks have a different criteria. So, and they also have different interest rates. There's just so much time that's going to be wasted going from one bank to another. Then you're going to provide your documents, your income, and then you're going to wait for the responses. And then you might end up with an incomplete answer as well. So there's just so much time and energy being wasted if you go to the bank and ask them to calculate it for you.
Yeah, especially when you take into consideration that every bank requires different documents as well. It's like nothing's simple, nothing's the same.
And this all sounds doom and gloom for us, but we do actually have a very good solution to this problem, which is, the drum roll, it's our free borrowing power consultation, guys. That's our solution. Yes. So in our free borrowing power consultation is essentially a loan specialist. So one of our loan specialists it could be one of us actually, will take the time to thoroughly understand your current financial situation. This includes reviewing your income sources and your debts, then gives you a far more accurate borrowing power estimation than anywhere else that you can go. Now, what are the reasons why we created this?
Because our investors, or investors in general, need clarity on their borrowing power. So it's very, very important that they understand their borrowing power or capacity, because this is what they need on setting realistic goals and making sure that they make informed decisions.
And as foreigners here, we also notice that there's no standardized pre-approval process. So unlike countries like Australia, where I'm from, or the US or the UK, where mortgage brokers are very popular, there is no formal pre-approval system here in the Philippines. And that really makes it difficult for investors, because without a pre-approval, you're left guessing how much you can borrow. And like we said, you're wasting your time visiting multiple banks for just estimates that'll get you nowhere and might be misleading. So it's very unnecessary. This lack of a streamlined system leads to lots of confusion, lots of missed opportunities, and delays in securing your property investments. And that's something that we don't want to happen.
Yeah.
So let's now discuss what exactly is involved. If someone goes to us, they go to our website and book in a free borrowing power consultation, what exactly will we do for them?
Well, number one, we're going to assess their income and their debts. We'll dive deep into their financial situation, which would include all their sources of income and any existing debts. So this will allow us to calculate their exact borrowing power, so that they're able to know how much they can borrow with the banks.
Yeah, and it would make it easier as well, because because we have a very good working relationship with these banks. We're partnered with the biggest banks in the Philippines. We understand what incomes and what debts most of these banks include. So that's a way we make it a lot easier for you to be able to calculate your exact borrowing power.
The second thing that we do is we help you understand the real cost of borrowing, right? So this is including not just the monthly repayments, but also the interest rates that are put on top of that by the bank, and how those payments will fit into your budget over the lifetime of your loan. So for the next 20 years.
We can give you a cost on the maximum borrowing power, but maybe you're like, oh, I want to be a little conservative. So maybe your maximum is 15 million, but then you go, oh, that's a little too much money. Let's just go to 10. We can then give you a clear breakdown of what both those scenarios are. So how much is your monthly payment going to be if you're borrowing at 15 or if you're borrowing at 10? So we can do both for you.
So I do just want to clarify here that Estra Finance is a mortgage brokerage, but we are not the lenders ourselves. So part of our process is that we match you with the right banks. This is based on things that we discover in your financial profile. We'll be able to identify which of the local Filipino banks will lend to you, which ones you qualify for. Like we say, every bank has different qualifiers. So we'll be able to tell you straight up, which banks are able to help you without you wasting your time going to every single one and it taking weeks and weeks. We can do it on the day.
Yeah, just a disclaimer though, we tell you which banks will most likely approve this amount of money, but of course, especially if you're buying a pre-selling condo and you won't need the loan for another 5 years, your circumstances could change. So we let you know which banks will lend you money now, and that will give you confidence. But if anything changes, that also changes your situation. So it's good to keep us in the loop, essentially.
Yeah.
So we can then fix anything that may happen. And that's number 4, is like we act as a safety net for you, right? So you can come to us. Let's say you initially came to us, we gave you your borrowing capacity and let you know, like, these are the banks that will lend to you, and then maybe in a year's time from now, you get a decrease in payment. Well, then you can come to us and then we can reevaluate your situation, reevaluate what your actual borrowing capacity is, and which banks will now lend to you based on your new current financial situation. And then if you are in a situation where, it's looking like you won't be able to afford the condominium that you just purchased, at least if you come to us, we can then quickly give you time to be like, hey, you won't be able to get a loan for this amount. So either increase your payment or you might have to sell it, but at least you get a lot more time than say you realize this when it's about to turn over and you need to borrow the money.
And then one more thing that we'll do for you is that we'll connect you with credible real estate agents. So once you've learned about your borrowing power, we actually connect you with credible accredited agents from the top real estate developers in the country, which includes Ayala, MegaWorld, SMDC, EMCI, and Robinson's Land. Because we have a working relationship with these agents, we can check in with them periodically and make sure everything is going smoothly in terms of financing for your property. And if something does go wrong, we can work with them to find an alternative for you.
Last thing we do for you, just a fun one, is we actually explore the property appreciation potential. So in this consultation, we will show you, if you did buy a property at 15 million, let's say, and it appreciates over the average appreciation that the Philippines has at the moment, which is sitting around 6%. What does that look like for you? And in terms of a wealth building aspect, like how much will that 15 million pesos be worth in, 10, 20, 30 years at 6%? And you will be very, very surprised of how much a 6% appreciation. And that's an average appreciation. So you'll be surprised how much a property will be worth over time.
Could be more, could be less than that 6%, but it's an average. So that's everything that we cover for you in just one consultation, which is pretty amazing. It's totally worth it. And just as a reminder, our consultations are absolutely free and they're obligation free. So it's definitely worth doing. Even if you're not looking to get a home loan right this second, it's really valuable to understand your borrowing power now so that when the time comes, you are fully prepared and you are confident in your ability to secure financing.
Yeah, we would say it's one of the best first steps for your real estate journey to understand your borrowing power and get a clear understanding of how much you can actually afford. And that will allow you to then actually look at properties that are within your budget and then go from there. The chances are you're not getting a home loan right now. And when you get your borrowing power, it might be a few years to potentially 5 years before you need a home loan. But when you do need a home loan, we have a company called Estra Finance where we guide you every step of the way. So Estra Finance is a mortgage brokerage that offers completely free services where we handle all the heavy lifting for you, from finding the best home loan option to managing the paperwork to monitoring interest rates so you can focus on finding your dream home. Now, let's just quickly discuss the 5 strategies that Estra Finance does for you that no other company right now will do for you when finding the perfect home loan? What are the strategies?
In the Philippines. No other company in the Philippines.
In the Philippines. Yeah, sorry, in the Philippines.
So first one is that we help you find the best loan options out of all of our partnered banks. So we compare some of the biggest banks here in the Philippines to help you find the bank that saves you the most on the interest paid, the most on your monthly payments, puts you in the best financial position, improves your net worth, and fits in with your goals best. So it's a very personalized procedure.
Right. And our second strategy is that we have a prepayment analysis. So we provide expert strategies tailored to your financial situation, helping you save thousands on interest and pay off your home loan sooner. So our prepayment analysis identifies the best ways to reduce your interest payments and accelerate your loan payoff.
And we actually don't stop when your loan is approved. Like, we're pretty much in it with you for the however long that you borrow your loan for, whether it's 10 years or 20 years. We were there until from when you get approved up until you are completely paid off. We say that because our third strategy is we monitor your interest rates. So meaning that if you get approved and let's say 2 years from now, the interest rates drop, we will then analyze through, our financial dashboards, whether it's not it's worth it for you to actually move to another bank and take advantage of the decrease in interest rate, because it's not as simple as seeing that your interest rate at the moment is 10% and then the other bank's interest is 7%. It's not as easy as that, because you got to consider the costs of moving and things like that. But don't worry, we do that all for you. So if you get a loan with us, we'll monitor your interest rates and then refinance you and move you to another bank if there's a good opportunity for you to do so.
And since we're monitoring your interest rates over the lifetime of your loan, we also track your equity. So your home equity is the amount of your home that you truly own. So if your house is like a pie and your home is worth 5 million pesos and you still owe 2 million pesos on your mortgage, the amount of the pie that you own is worth 3 million. And that 3 million is your home equity. So smart investors use the equity in their homes to buy more properties or even invest in other ventures, which helps them grow that net worth faster. So we monitor your equity to ensure you're not missing out on any opportunities that can help you get closer to financial freedom, not just property investing.
And lastly, we focus on the goals that you want to achieve. So we customize our services to meet your goals. So our approach here is centered on understanding and achieving what matters most to you. So instead of offering a generic one-size-fits-all service like many banks, we take the time to listen to your unique needs and aspirations. Whether you're looking to secure a loan, plan for your future, or explore other financial opportunities in real estate, we customize our services that are aligned to your specific goals. So by focusing on your priorities, we ensure that the solutions that we provide are not only effective, but also uniquely suited to help you succeed.
Great. So number one, we have a free borrowing power consultation, but we also have a free consultation for you to get a home loan or your refinancing. Again, both services are for free. And if you want to take advantage of both services, we will include a link in the description for the free borrowing power consultation. And if you also want to get help with a home loan or refinancing.
And if anything that we've spoken about today interests you, or anything that we've spoken about in our other podcasts interests you, be sure to join our real estate community group. There'll be a link in the description below. You will gain access to lots of exclusive resources that can help you make better strategic decisions. Plus, you'll be surrounded by people who are also looking to build wealth and strive for financial freedom. So make sure you join the group with the link in the description below.
All right. So don't forget to sign up for our free borrowing power consultation and then join our real estate community group. And lastly, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out about anything about your real estate investments. That is all that we have for you. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thank
See
you
ya.
so much,
Bye.
guys. See you.